This is a 2007 Ford Focus, and today we're going to be replacing the front brakes on it. The front brakes often can last a couple of years, but do ultimately require replacing. It's very similar to the same brake pads that you'll find on other vehicles, so if you're familiar with it, should not be too much of a sweat. To quickly review the things that we're going to need to make this job a success, first and foremost, obviously, you need new brake rotor and brake pads to do the job with. Typically, they do sell these all as one unit now, so that's both getting a new rotor and new brake pads. You can just buy brake pads if you'd like. However, the word of caution, as I'll show later on in the video, is that rotors do wear down and gain grooves, so that's where there is advantage in getting a new rotor. That way you're just going to be sure that the brakes are going to work to the full extent. You can also mill rotor, which is to re-scuff the exterior surface that you see right here. You can see it's a little bit scuffed right there. That is an option, but often folks just don't simply have that kind of hardware. But you can pick this up at any auto store, order it online. There's a lot of great outfits there for you. Some other doodads and hardware that we're going to need, just a simple 15 millimeter socket wrench to help with some bolts. This is a 7 metric hexagon, basically the same thing as an Allen wrench that I just have as an extension for my wrench, just to help out with some other bolts. And then also a vise. This is actually going to be really critical. Brakes in general expand over time. So the brake caliper expands as the brake material wears down. So we're going to need to reset that, and using a vise is the easiest way to do that. Another thing too that we're going to need in terms of just quick lubricants is just some simple lubricating oil, as often there can be a lot of buildup on bolts, so we're going to need a way to break through that. And also, let me grab in here, brake parts cleaner, says it in the name. We're going to use this to help out with the rotor and getting some of the protective coating off of it to be sure it can work out correctly. All in, pretty minimal on a lot of the hardware that's needed, but some pretty critical things to make it an easy job. Another thing good to note is the Ford Focus has front traditional brakes, so regular brake pads, whereas the back has drum brakes. Drum brakes are a little bit different to change. They actually can last a little bit longer, but do require a little bit different of an approach and can sometimes be a little bit more costly to replace. We'll just be doing the front brakes in this video and maybe save the back brakes for another time. So with the tire now off, you can see a lot of the main assembly here. So we have the arm that holds our two brake pads together, pinches them against the rotor. And then on the back end is still the arm here. There are two 20 millimeter screws that hold the arm onto the rest of the assembly. And you can also see the cover for the bleeding nipple here for where the brake fluid runs, which runs through this hose right here. So to move things along, we need to disconnect the arm to free it up and let us get the brake pads and the rotor off. So I've sprayed our bolts there with some just simple lubricating oil, as that can rust and corrode over time, so we need something to help break that up. Again, these are 20 millimeter, so we'll just take those off and get this arm freed up. Now that we have the brake arm free, we're going to very carefully place this on top of this bucket here. It's really important to not put any tension on the brake fluid line, as we want that to not cause any breakage or, the worst case scenario, any brake fluid leaks. So we're going to very carefully place the arm onto the bucket while being mindful of the line. Now that we have the brake arm free, we're going to want to work off the brake pad material itself. So you'll see this bracket here, which is a retention clip holding in one of the brake pads. So we're going to carefully pry that off with just a simple flathead screwdriver and help free that up. All right, now that we have the retention clip off, we're going to just gently push, just take grab of the brake arm and gently push the brake pad inward. It just has simple clips that it clips in. So we just push it roughly like that. And there we go, our first part of the brake pads. Now to get the other brake pad out, you can see it on the other side here. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna push from the back end, right behind it. This brake pad has a clip that it's seated in the caliper. So all we have to do is just pop it out and force it out that way. So I'm just gonna use my hands and pop it out, pushing from behind. And with all the brake pad material off now, we just take the rotor off too. Depending on the kit that you bought, you may not have bought a rotor, but a lot of folks actually do now sell that along with the brake pad. So the rotor, if you are taking it off, just simply comes right off like that. Now, if you did also buy a rotor, often it ships with a little bit of a chemical treatment to it. This is to help, it's an anti-corrosive cover. That way it helps the steel not corrode as it sits on the shelf and waits to be installed. So just to get that anti-corrosion coating off, we're just gonna simply take our pretty new rotor out and then just use some simple brake clean. Crazy thought, right? Using a brake parts cleaner for a brake job. And then we're simply just gonna spray down the rotor. The focus is to get any of that coating off. So I'm just gonna have simply spray it down. Brake clean is great for these kinds of clean jobs because it's able to strip off any kind of varnish or any kind of chemical coverings, and then it evaporates very quickly too. Now this is a pretty good comparison to do of our old brake parts on the left and our new on the right, just to show the kind of aging and wearing that you do see take place. First thing to notice is the new brake pads. Notice the brake material that you see there, pretty good solid. Whereas on this guy, really was wearing down to the last bit. And same thing on the outers too. So as that brake pad material wears away, you lose your braking force and capability. Another thing too is you can see on the new rotor, you can see it's a little bit roughed. That way it has a little bit more friction, gripping. That way it can stop more quickly. Rotors, as they age over time, the brake pads will actually just smooth it out and wear these grooves in there. So that just means that this rotor is not able to stop as quickly as this one. You can also see when you flip it up on the cooling channels, on the inside, there's a lot of corrosion that's taken place. So just not good overall. And this is why we do preventative maintenance. So good to see the before and after. Now, before we start putting the new brake parts on, we need to press the caliper back in. This piston, it gradually moves in as the brake material wears down, and we want to reset it. That way we have room for the new brake pads to fit around the rotor. So all we have to do is just take a simple vise. If you don't have one of these, I literally bought this for brake job purposes. Can pick one up pretty cheap. And all you're gonna do is very carefully press this in and set it back. Now, before we do put the brake pads immediately on, we're gonna apply some lubricating spray on the back end of the brake pads. The reason why we wanna do this is it helps cut down on noise. There's nothing worse than squeaky brakes. I have a couple things here that I'm actually gonna use. So this is just like a 50-cent package of brake lubricant. I'm actually gonna use this later. There's also specific sprays that you can get that are anti-squeal sprays. Those work perfectly well. I actually have some white lithium grease here on hand too. This is a heavier duty spray. It's a very thick lubricant, and this is also gonna help out on just lubricating any metal to metal chatter that might happen as we're breaking in the brakes. So what I'm just gonna do is just apply a simple coat on the back end. All right, now that we have everything ready to go, all we have to do is take our brake pad that has the clips, and we're just gonna gently work it back in. And this is just gonna press right back in. And actually, I'm gonna use the vise to help me out here a little bit. All right, now that we have that brake pad on, we're gonna put the new rotors on and mount it back on, retightening our screws as well. And to help make sure that we're getting enough clearance space on the brake pads, what we're gonna do is those hexagonal bolts in the back, took the cover off of those, and then I'm using, I believe this is a size 7 metric hexagonal screw, and we're just loosening up these 2 back bolts to give us enough room and clearance for the brake pad material to be able to recede back. So I'm just gonna loosen them up first with the big guy, and then work them back. All right, and now that we have the brake pad pushed in, we're gonna first size it up and be sure that it's gonna be a good fit. If it isn't wanting to fit, what you can do is just be sure that all the screws are loosened up and that you've pushed the brake pad back far enough. That way it's able to properly engage with the rotor. So from here, we're going to put the 2 large holding screws back in the back and reset the caliper back on the assembly. So I moved our brake caliper back on just to be sure everything would fit up nice and neat, which it does. So what I'm gonna do is put our front brake pad on. I have to take this off to then place it on, put it back on, and then we're gonna put back on our main holding bolts that holds the whole assembly together. And then for the very last part, we're gonna put our retention clip back on. Now before we do this, we're gonna use the lubricant that I picked up earlier. And we're going to apply a little bit. We're gonna apply a little bit onto the different contact points that this clip has with the rest of the assembly. Ooh, it's purple. It's a pretty cute color. So we're focusing on the contact points, which are right along here. This is just gonna help make that metal to metal contact a little bit gentler on the ears, especially since we're breaking it in. And you just simply put it in there and there, and you just gotta work it in a little bit. And then I'll apply just a little bit more lubricant. It's okay to be a little bit overzealous with this. When you think about it, brakes, they're just gonna be wearing down all the time. So it's all right to be over applying some of the lubricant here to just help them break in. A final thing that's good to check is the brake fluid reservoir too. You wanna be sure that the brake fluid has not exceeded the maximum level, which we're still right back at, so that's great. This just makes sure that you haven't overpressurized the system or anything to that effect. Then next, we'll put the wheel back on and get the car back on the ground. All right, with the car back on the ground, we're gonna turn the car on, engage the brakes a couple of times. You'll notice it's mushy at first, but then gradually the pressure will build up, and then we'll check the brake fluid level too to make sure that's all right. So I'll turn it on, pardon the noise. Good, that's good. All right, we're good there. We'll do a quick spot check. Just make sure that everything's looking good, which it is. And then finally, let's check the brake fluid level once more, which is actually a little bit over. So I'm just gonna have to take some brake fluid out of there to help account for the new brakes that have been put on. Outside of that, I'm gonna take it out for a quick spin just to be sure that the brake action is there, and we'll be good to go. So again, really quick and easy actually. Once you have the system down, it is recommended to change both sides at the same time just so that they wear down evenly. Thanks again for watching, guys. If you have any comments or suggestions for videos in the future, be sure to leave a comment below and like and subscribe, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.